Act 3, Scene 1 opens on the following day towards sunset. The earth wall of the trench outside glows with a light that slowly fades with the sinking sun. Stanhope is alone, wandering to and fro across the dugout. He looks up the steps for a moment, crosses to the table, and glances down at the map. He looks anxiously at his watch and, going to the servants' dugout, calls to Mason. The raid is imminent, and Stanhope is clearly trying to prepare his officers for it as best as he is able, even if all he can do is make sure that the coffee that he has asked Mason to prepare for them is hot and strong. His anxiety manifests itself, not only in the way he checks his watch, but also in the way that he wanders restlessly to and fro. Note how watches and references to time play a large role in the first part of this scene, as a means to ramp up the tension until Osborne and Raleigh leave to go on the raid. Stanhope seems to have been awaiting the arrival of the Colonel, who almost immediately comes down the steps into the dugout. The Colonel asks him if everything is ready. Stanhope responds that it is, but, after a short silence, asks him, "You've no news then?" He has clearly been hoping that the plans will be altered to a surprise raid farther up the line after dark, so that the operation stands a better chance of success, as well as fewer casualties. His hopes, however, are dashed, as the Colonel reveals that the Brigadier was not receptive to this idea, instead stating that the present arrangements have got to stand. The tension between the pair is evident, with Stanhope's frustration at the way in which his higher-ranking officers are stubbornly sticking to a flawed plan, which will lead to men's lives being needlessly put at risk, causing the Colonel himself to become irritated. The Stanhope cannot understand that his hands are also tied. The Colonel impatiently cuts Stanhope's questions short. "Look here, Stanhope, I've done all I can, but my report's got to be at headquarters by 7 this evening. If we wait till it's dark, we shall be too late." It turns out, of course, that the reason why the raid has to take place so early is that the powers that be have got a conference to arrange the placing of reserves, and, as Stanhope rather sarcastically observes, they can't have it later because of dinner, I suppose. Meanwhile, the Boche are sitting over there with a dozen machine guns trained on that hole, waiting for our fellows to come. Note how the Colonel is unable to disagree with the essential truth of what Stanhope says. That those in absolute command were so woefully out of touch with the rank and file that they would rather the death of expendable soldiers than a delay to their dinner plans. The only way the Colonel can justify his position is by saying that he cannot disobey orders. Stanhope's questioning of why the trench mortars didn't blow a dozen holes in different places, so the Boche wouldn't know which we were going to use, is met with the simple response that it took 3 hours to blow that one, and the rhetorical question, how could they blow a dozen in that time? The topic of conversation now switches to the logistics of the raid, rather than its rights and wrongs, and they synchronise their watches. The plan is for the trench mortars to drop smoke bombs 30 yards to the right, so that the smoke blows across to give the men cover. The Colonel will watch the raid from the trench just above here, and the prisoners will be brought back to Stanhope's dugout so that they can be questioned right away. There's an awkward pause as the Colonel sucks hard at his pipe. Stanhope roves restlessly about, smoking a cigarette. The Colonel clearly feels the need to break the silence, perhaps concerned that Stanhope's evident restlessness will provoke more challenges to the Brigadier's position, and so decides to give him a pep talk. It's no good getting depressed. After all, it's only 60 yards. The Boche will be firing into a blank fog. Osborne's a cool, level-headed chap, and Raleigh's the very man to dash in. You've picked good men to follow them? Stanhope's response that they are the best all youngsters, strong, keen chaps, seems to reassure the Colonel that Stanhope is back on side. Now that he has asserted his authority, and Stanhope has accepted that the raid must go ahead, the Colonel is able to speak more candidly and on a more personal level, confessing that, "You know quite well I'd give anything to cancel the beastly affair." He also reveals that the Germans have repeated their trick of tying red rags on the wire. We know from Trotter's joking about it in the previous scene that this is bad news for the men. The two men are interrupted by Osborne and Raleigh coming down the steps. The tension continues to build as there are more references to time, and we realise that the moment of the raid is moving ever closer. We learn from Osborne that it is just 1:45, that the men are going to stand by at 2, and that the smoke bombs drop exactly on the hour. The men are in the centre dugout having their rum to give them liquid courage before they go over the top. Note how when Stanhope asks the Colonel if he would like to go up to speak to them, he is reluctant, showing a lack of sensitivity to their needs, brought on by a lack of experience of the reality of what these men had to endure. Well, don't you think they'd rather be left alone? Stanhope, who in contrast to the Colonel is very sensitive to the needs of his men, assures him that they would appreciate a word or two. Just before he departs, the Colonel, somewhat awkwardly, says a few words to both Osborne and Raleigh, reassuring them that if they succeed, he'll recommend them both for the MC, or Military Cross. As the Colonel and Stanhope exit, Osborne calls Stanhope back. There is a moment of heightened pathos in what is essentially their farewell scene, as he gives Stanhope his personal effects for him to look after. He takes a letter and his watch from his tunic pocket and puts it on the table. Then he pulls off his ring. "If anything should happen, would you send these along to my wife?" He pauses and gives an awkward little laugh. The way in which Stanhope refuses to consider the possibility that he won't come back signals to the audience that this is very likely to be his fate after all, and increases the sense of sadness even further. Note that Sherriff does not give any time to a similar scene with Raleigh, who is at just as much risk as Osborne, suggesting that he will come through the raid relatively unscathed. There's a moment of affection between the two as Stanhope lets Osborne know just what his friendship and support has meant to him, which he disguises in a joke. "What on earth should I do without you? Must have someone to tuck me up in bed." As Stanhope exits, he lingers for a moment and calls out, "Cheero!" For a second, their eyes meet. They laugh. Stanhope goes slowly up the steps. This is the last time the pair will ever properly speak. Osborne and Raleigh are left alone. They both smoke. Osborne a small pipe, while Raleigh opts for a cigarette. Osborne asks Raleigh if he's going to have a drop of rum in his coffee, but Raleigh declines. He's obviously not used to drinking and is concerned that it will make him a bit muzzy. Osborne is also just having the coffee as it is. He knows the odds are stacked against them, and he clearly wants to keep his wits about him. Even with the threat of his own death hanging over him, however, Osborne is caring until the last, encouraging Raleigh to talk about how he feels by sharing his own emotions. "I've got a sort of empty feeling inside." This candidness allows Raleigh to admit that he feels the same way, which in turn allows Osborne to give him some reassurance. "That's it. Wind up. I keep wanting to yawn too. It'll pass off directly we start." There is another reference to time as Osborne, looking at his watch on the table, reveals that we've got 8 minutes yet. The pair spend the next couple of minutes going through the details of the raid for the very last time. By Osborne's reckoning, it will, with luck, be over in just 3 minutes. And now let's forget all about it for He looks at his watch. For 6 minutes. Raleigh is not so easily distracted, however, and we get yet another glimpse of his naive excitement as he exclaims, "How topping if we both get the MC." Osborne's attempts to talk about mundane things instead, such as his preference for coffee, tea or cocoa, fail as Raleigh repeatedly returns to the subject of the raid. "Your coffee sweet enough?" "Yes, thanks, it's jolly good coffee." "Wonder what the Boche are doing over there now?" In the end, Osborne manages to get his attention off the raid by quoting a piece of nonsense verse from Through the Looking Glass, the sequel to Alice's Adventures in Wonderland by Lewis Carroll, which Raleigh, unlike Trotter in the previous scene, is able to appreciate and complete. "The time has come," the walrus said, "to talk of many things, of shoes and ships and sealing wax, of cabbages and kings, and why the sea is boiling hot, and whether pigs have wings." This triggers Osborne to ask Raleigh whether he likes black pigs or white pigs, which in turn leads to a conversation about the New Forest in Hampshire, where Raleigh is from. It turns out that Osborne is very familiar with that part of the world himself, and the two spend the next few minutes discussing their shared love of the area. Raleigh reminisces about how Dennis and I followed the stream once as far as we could, and wishes that the pair had known Osborne before the war, because you could have come with Dennis and me. There's another moment of pathos as Raleigh invites Osborne to come and stay with us one day, and he responds that he should like to, awfully. The audience knows in their hearts that this will never happen. The pair then go on to discuss Osborne's interest in archaeology until he glances at his watch, and Raleigh asks him, "Is it time yet?" "There are 2 minutes to go. Then we must go up." We learn that there will be something special for dinner, in the shape of a fresh chicken sent up from Noyelle Farm, and a most awful luxury, 2 bottles of champagne and half a dozen cigars. Raleigh notices Osborne's ring on the table. He picks it up. When Osborne tells him that he has deliberately left it there because "I don't want to risk losing it," it seems that Raleigh has a moment of realisation as he grasps the true gravity of the situation, that they may be minutes away from death, which is revealed in his body language as he puts the ring slowly down. Note how the mood between the pair has become awkward as Raleigh responds to Osborne's forced light-heartedness that he hates leaving a pipe when it's got a nice glow on the top like that, with a short laugh. With one final glance at his watch as it lies on the table, Osborne announces that it is 3 minutes to, and that "I think we'd better go." And they go towards the steps. The raid itself takes place off stage, and the stage directions give detailed instructions for the sound effects and what can be seen through the doorway of the dugout, leaving the audience able only to imagine what is happening out there. There is silence in the trenches above the deserted dugout. Then, suddenly, there comes the dull crush of bursting smoke bombs, followed in a second by the vicious rattle of machine guns. The red and green glow of German alarm rockets comes faintly through the dugout door. Then comes the thin whistle and crash of falling shells. First one by itself, then 2, almost together. Quicker and quicker they come, till the noise mingles together in confused turmoil. Yet the noise is deadened by the earth walls of the tiny dugout, and comes quite softly till the whine of one shell rises above the others to a shriek and a crash. A dark funnel of earth leaps up beyond the parapet of the trench outside. Earth falls and rattles down the steps, and a black cloud of smoke rises slowly out of sight. Gradually the noise dies away. There's a longer pause between the crash of each bursting shell. The machine guns stop. Rattle again and stop. Rattle for the last time and stop. As the sound of the raid slowly dies away, Stanhope re-enters. He is pale and haggard. The raid has clearly taken a huge emotional toll on him. He's accompanied by the Colonel. Note how he quickly excuses himself. He's not interested in any information the captured German soldier may have. He's far more anxious about the welfare of his men in general, and Osborne in particular. "You won't want me, will you? I want to go and see those men." The Colonel proceeds to interrogate the German soldier, who is nothing but a young and frightened boy. We learn a number of things from this, all of which say much about Sherriff's belief in the inhumanity and futility of war. Firstly, that the soldier has no real useful information to impart. He's only willing to give the name of his regiment and when they came up to that part of the line. Secondly, that some of the men, we don't know yet how many or who, although we have a sneaking suspicion, have therefore sacrificed their lives pointlessly. And thirdly, that the contents of his pockets, some letters, presumably from his family or his girl back home, a bit of string, sir, little box of fruit drops, pocket knife, sir, bit of cedar pencil, and a stick of chocolate, sir, reveal that the rank and file on the German side were not a faceless enemy at all, but were just as individual and human as their counterparts on the British side. The interrogation over for the time being, the German soldier is taken away and Stanhope re-enters. He comes slowly down the steps, his body language revealing that something is very wrong. The Colonel, however, is oblivious, wrapped up as he is in his joy and, in all likelihood, his relief that he has something to report back to the Brigadier. Seemingly indifferent to the plight of the men, he excitedly regales Stanhope with the 2 meagre pieces of information they have obtained, announcing that it's a feather in our cap, Stanhope. Stanhope couldn't be less interested. He has given one look of astonishment at the Colonel and strolled past him. He turns at the table and speaks in a dead voice. "How awfully nice, if the Brigadier's pleased." Clearly Stanhope is in shock, causing a state of disassociation. Note how his words, which are all the more deadly and condemnatory for them being delivered in an expressionless tone, take the wind out of the Colonel's sails as he realises that he has been completely insensitive. He's now on the back foot, shown by the way he stammers and hesitates. What? In the tense dialogue that ensues, we find out that only 4 men and Raleigh came back safely. As we suspected he would be, Osborne has been killed by a hand grenade while he was waiting for Raleigh. Raleigh enters. He too seems to be in shock. He comes slowly down the steps, walking as though he were asleep. His hands are bleeding. The Colonel turns to the boy with enthusiasm, clearly taking advantage of his appearance to interrupt his awkward interaction with Stanhope. "Very well done, Raleigh. Well done, my boy. I'll get you a military cross for this. Splendid." Raleigh, however, is unable to speak. He raises his hand to his forehead and sways. Note the contrast between Raleigh's naive excitement to the possibility of an MC before the raid and his speechless reaction to the Colonel's promise of one after it. He has come through his baptism of fire a changed man, as he has finally understood the true cost of the war. The Colonel exits, leaving Stanhope and Raleigh alone. Osborne has, up until this point, been a buffer between the two, mediating the strained relationship between the pair by reining in Stanhope's worst impulses and filling the role of mentor to Raleigh, which should otherwise have been filled by Stanhope. It remains to be seen how they will be able to navigate their relationship without his steadying influence. The early signs not good, however, as Stanhope, instead of comforting Raleigh, who sits with lowered head, looking at the palms of his hands, resorts to indifference, merely asking him in the same expressionless and dead voice, "Must you sit on Osborne's bed?" before exiting to leave the stricken young man alone. Thanks for watching. If you have any questions, please let me know in the comments section below and I'll do my best to answer them. Don't forget to subscribe to my channel for more videos on English language topics and exam techniques and English literature texts.